It's a great pleasure to be here in Paris again and to be with all of you, Link, Bruno, Fran, Bob, and Bob. What I want to do today is to very briefly talk a little bit about U.S. policy, especially as it frames up a year after the nuclear deal. Since the end of the Second World War, the United States has had three broad objectives for the Middle East. First has been promoting peace between Israel and its neighbors. Second has been ensuring the free flow of oil to global markets. And third has been preventing the rise of any single power in the region from domination. The present leadership in Iran places all three of these American objectives at risk. Tehran continues to oppose the Middle East peace process, periodically unleashing its proxies, Hamas and Hezbollah, to strike at Israel. It's threatened its neighbors in the Persian Gulf. It's interfered in Bahrain, intervened in Syria, interfered massively in Iraq's domestic affairs, armed the Houthis in Yemen, and warned that it will close the Strait of Hormuz. Iran has consistently attempted to revise the region by force rather than accommodating itself peacefully to the status quo. Now, the Obama administration was slow to understand the nature of the Iranian threat, despite the fact that the State Department has long labeled Iran the leading state sponsor of terror. The president reached out to the mullahs in his first year without preconditions. He shamefully remained silent as the regime crushed the Green Path movement in June of 2009. The administration barely reacted after a plot was uncovered to assassinate the Saudi Arabian ambassador at a Washington, D.C. restaurant, an act of terror that would have killed and injured dozens of Americans. Now, it's against this diplomatic context that the nuclear deal was negotiated last year. Serious questions remain about compliance, verification, and the ability of the United States and the international community to reimpose sanctions should Iran be caught cheating. Now, implementing the terms of this deal would be daunting enough if the only challenge was to elicit transparency from a regime that is a master of deception. However, the deal also frees up billions of dollars in frozen assets that Iran can and indeed has been using to mask its nuclear activities, advancing its ballistic missile programs, repressing domestic critics, and sponsoring foreign terrorist organizations like Hamas and Hezbollah. The nuclear deal's promise, its promise is to constrain Iran's nuclear weapons activities for the next decade in the hope that relaxing sanctions will expose the Iranian people to the outside world and somehow transform the regime into a more liberal, representative government that respects human rights and lives at peace with its neighbors. In short, the goal is an Iran that is willing to peacefully negotiate adjustments to the regional order, not subvert or overturn it by force. At its heart, the nuclear deal makes a bet that the Iranian regime will have fundamentally changed its nature when the agreement's limits on nuclear development will be lifted in 10 to 15 years. However, there is no apparent strategy for how the United States might shape the battlefield, either inside Iran or across the region, to move, coerce, or incentivize Iran to liberalize its government and fulfill this very hopeful vision. There are no plans for ramping up Radio Farda so that more outside news is beamed into Iran. There's no internet strategy that capitalizes on social media to appeal to the 60% of the Iranian population that's under the age of 30. There's no support for dissident voices and human rights advocates. And it's worth noting that even during the height of the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union, we always tried to support dissident voices and human rights advocates inside the Soviet Union. We have no apparent strategy for doing that today in Iran. Now, while the United States and our European partners have recently stepped up interdictions on the high seas to intercept Iranian arms shipments to Yemen, Tehran continues to stir up trouble in the Gulf states, to support Assad in Syria, and to exercise undue influence in Iraq. There is much more that can and should be done to sanction individuals and organizations that support Iran's proxies. In short, the next president of the United States needs to develop a comprehensive strategy to reassure our friends and allies around the Gulf and actively, aggressively promote regime change inside Iran. At the end of the day, the only guarantor of peace and security in the region is the nature of the Iranian regime. Thank you.